Hello and welcome to another episode of Storytime with Mr. Jackson. Now let's take a trip back to the year 1804, one that saw the death of Alexander Hamilton and the birth of Earth's 1 billionth human being. His name was Dave. But that was all small fry, for at this time, the only thing that really mattered, at least in Britain, was the ongoing World War. For this was also the age of Napoleon, that great boogeyman of English history. And by this point, Old Boney had already conquered most of mainland Europe, the tiny French corporal even daring to snatch the imperial crown itself from the hands of the Pope, instead crowning himself Roman Emperor. Eventually, all that stood between Napoleon and seemingly universal conquest was a tiny collection of islands commonly known as Great Britain. Well, the word went out far and wide across the British Islands, invasion was imminent, and in order to keep their islands safe, citizens were told to scan the coasts and report anything vaguely French that floated by.
Collins.
Fine. We'll move on. It is a fascinating world, though.
Well, one night, several fishermen from the town of Hartlepool saw a massive shape come into view just off the coast. Well, the men strained and strained until something finally caught their eye. It was the dreaded tricolor of the Republic. The French were here. Who knew what manner of evil these godless revolutionaries were planning? I mean, somebody had to get the word out. But before they could return to the town, a massive storm blew in, forcing the fishermen to moor their tiny vessel near the shore. And much to their amusement, the French man-o-war seemed to be oblivious to the coming danger, simply dropping their anchor far off the coast and settling in for a hard night at sea. Well, not long after both ships dropped their anchors, the fishermen noticed that the French man-o-war was having a bit of trouble.
Yo, Brennan, break him up a little.
Who's steering the boat?
Dad, please shut up. Please shut up!
In fact, she seemed to be foundering in the thunderstorm, with water rushing over her gunnels faster than it could be pumped out. Well, the fishermen simply laughed and began taking bets with one another on when the mighty French warship would finally go down. Eager for some entertainment, the fishermen simply sat there at anchor just off the shore for a while, just watching the French ship break apart, passing a jug of rum in between them and laughing as men jumped into the foaming surf. So all in all, a good evening, everything considered. Livy, the Roman author and historian, had this to say about watching men at sea. "It is a pleasant thing when the sea is high and the winds are dashing the waves about, to watch from shore the struggles of another." Well, after the now very drunk fishermen were sure that the French vessel had broken apart and gone down with all hands, they waited for a break in the weather before going back into town to tell the others of what they had seen. Well, that next morning, the weather was clear and the citizens of Hartlepool went down to the beach to search for anything of value that might have washed ashore. After all, ships of that time tended to be made from the finest hardwoods, and their holds were always filled with all sorts of interesting valuables. Well, the citizens made a day of it, laughing and playing amongst the wreckage, looting what they could and clowning around with the corpses of the odd French sailor that had washed ashore before, looting the body. But suddenly, this carnival atmosphere of broken wood and twisted bodies was shattered by a rough shout. "Survivors!" The assembled townsfolk immediately turned their attention to a small man not far from shore, clinging to what was once a piece of the mighty French man-o-war. Well, all at once, the people of Hartlepool dropped everything and went after the survivor, with dozens of unwashed men diving into the surf equipped with ropes. And a short struggle ensued as the Frenchmen began to scream and flail like a wild animal, even managing to bludgeon a few of the townsfolk before they overpowered him with rifle butts and clubs.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
Well, after an intense struggle, the townsfolk managed to bind the Frenchman's hands and feet, the man screaming and squirming even after he was well and truly caught. But despite being drugged ashore and being given ample time to calm down, the Frenchman continued to struggle, thrashing and screaming like some kind of wild animal any time he was questioned or even approached. Well, the good folk of Hartlepool were instantly repelled by the Frenchman's uncouth manners and psychotic ramblings. The man was simply a lunatic. And not only his manners, but his looks also assaulted the good people of Hartlepool. Now, being the good patriots they all no doubt were, none of them had ever seen a Frenchman before. All they really knew was that they were rude, hairy, and downright unpleasant to look at. And moreover, it was said you couldn't understand a word of what they were saying as they just mumbled incoherently. Well, this particular chap fitted that description to a T. And better still, the Frenchman was dressed in a white officer's uniform.
If I die, I will die well dressed.
Clearly, he was someone of note, even if he refused to calm down and, have a civilized conversation like a normal person. Well, the townsfolk quickly got their fill of the angry little Frenchman and decided to drag him to the town square for a trial. They would show this heathen the ways of law and order. Well, the mob soon placed the Frenchman in a stockade where he began to thrash and turn around, spitting and screaming at anyone who passed him by. Well, the mob then gathered all the notables and learned men they could find from the surrounding areas, this constituting a legal body of sorts whose rule would carry the force of law. Well, this local tribunal questioned their surprisingly strong prisoner for what felt like hours, demanding to know what Napoleon was planning to do with their small town. But despite the constant questions and more than a few savage blows to his head, the French officer simply shrieked in terror and bore his surprisingly long teeth to the crowd, gnashing them like the devil himself. Well, not only had this man failed to provide them with any information, but his behavior was simply unconscionable, simply out of keeping with what was to be expected from a gentleman and a soldier of the French Republic. Hours of questioning got them nowhere, with the Frenchman never uttering a word, the man simply screaming and glowering at the assembled masses. And eventually the tribunal had seen enough. This irate Frenchman was obviously a spy, the man having probably taken some sort of drug to dull his senses upon capture.
Do you smoke crack cocaine?
Exactly. Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine.
Well, this in mind, they ordered that the Frenchman be hung by the neck until dead as a spy.
That is without doubt the worst pirate I have ever seen.
Well, this in mind, they ordered that the Frenchman be hung by the neck until dead as a spy. And even as the sentence was being carried out, the French agent never stopped shrieking, his stubby little legs kicking nothing but air as he swung. Well, after this was done, the good folks of Hartlepool put the word out, informing the crowd that a French man-o-war had gone down just off the coast, and that they had arrested and dispatched an evil agent of Napoleon who had washed ashore to do them harm not long after. They also assured the crown that they had just prevented an international conspiracy and probably just saved the nation itself. News began to spread to the other towns, and soon the investigations began. Crown officials canvassed the town of Hartlepool, asking for eyewitness testimony as well as the whereabouts of the Frenchman's body. Well, these investigators soon found that the French spy was no such thing, that he was in fact completely innocent of all charges, that the man couldn't have possibly been guilty of even a single crime. Well, when they heard this, the townsfolk were shocked, wondering how on earth these investigators could be so sure. After all, they had only looked at the corpse for a few brief seconds before they both began laughing hysterically. Well, the good people of Hartlepool demanded to know what was so damned funny. Well, after the investigators caught their breath, they did their best to explain things to the good folks of Hartlepool in a way that, they could understand. And as you may have guessed by now, the man in question was no such thing. In fact, he wasn't even human.
Not human?
The townsfolk gasped.
Be he some kind of devil? I knew it!
Well, the investigators again stifled a giggle before explaining that no, the dead man was not in fact the devil either. The government men explained that this was no man, nor was he a devil, going on to shore that this dead spy was most likely a chimpanzee. The investigators then explained very slowly that ships traveled from one end of the globe to the other on a regular basis, and that this unfortunate animal was most likely the ship's mascot picked up in more southern climates. Well, the townsfolk protested at this, pointing out the white officer's uniform he'd been wearing. I mean, what about that? Well, the investigators shook their heads, explaining that the French captain probably dressed him up like that for fun, going on to assure the crowd that not even the French would place an animal in a position of command. Word soon got out about the mix-up, with London papers running the story of how a chimp had clung to a piece of wood through a storm, only to be kidnapped by angry peasants on shore and killed after a mock trial. Scandalous. The term monkey hanger was ascribed to the good folks of Hartlepool, a name that is stuck to this very day. Now we have no way of knowing if the story is actually true or not, but regardless of the actual fact of the matter, the tale has become part of the very fabric of the region, a funny story retold over and over again for generations. The earliest account we have of the events comes from a song by the traveling showman Ned Corbin written in 1854, a full 50 years after the supposed fact. Now Ned may have invented the story, he was definitely capable, as he was a well-known entertainer and songwriter of his time, the Weird Al of his day. And one of Ned's big things was going from town to town, making funny songs about each new place and its people, using history and stereotype like a painter would his brush. This is the Monkey Song, possibly by Ned, but definitely tracing its roots back to about the 1850s and referencing older times. In former times when war and strife, the French invasion did threaten life, and all around was armed to the knife. The fisherman hung the monkey-o. The fisherman with courage high seized the monkey for a French spy. Hang him, says one, he's to die. They did, they hung the monkey-o. They tried every means to make him speak, and tortured the monkey till loud he did shriek. Says Jens, that's a French, says others, that's a Greek. For the fisherman had got all drunky-o. Hammer his ribs therein the thief, or pummel his head, hands and feet, for he's landed here for naught but grief. He's the Napoleon's unlucky-o. Thus to the monkey all hands behaved, cut off his whiskers, that one Yan chap raved. Another bawled out, he's never been shaved. So commenced to scrape the monkey-o. Well, they put him in a gridiron hot. The monkey then quite lively got, and he rolled his eyes then quite a lot. For the monkey again turned funky-o. A fisherman up to the monkey goes, saying, hang him Jens and end his woes. But then the monkey flew at him and bit off his nose. In former times, when war and strife, the French invasion did threaten life, and all around was armed to the knife. The fisherman did hung a monkey-o. And in Ned's time, the town of Hartlepool was actually two towns. Old Hartlepool, which had the ancient village and the fishing wharfs, and West Hartlepool, a newly built industrial city of brick and wrought iron, full of educated folks who looked down their noses at the bumpkins who lived in Old Town. So monkey hangers was probably thought up around this time either by Ned or by the smiling elites of West Town. Either way, it was meant to demean the folks of the Old Town, as if to say, don't listen to them, they're morons. These are the same people who hung a monkey. Over the years, the two towns grew into one another, and the term monkey hangers became less of a slur and more of another bit of local flavor. The residents now weirdly proud of the strange tale that had put their town on the map. Now you might ask yourself, though, why were the French people and Napoleon himself seen as such objects of fear? And, well, there's a long, medium, and a short answer to that question, but let's go with the short one here. Now, the new French Republic turned empire was feared because it was effective. In the last decade, the French had shown that they were far better at organizing manpower than any other power on Earth, even the Chinese. And it was true. While other nations measured their armies by the tens of thousands, the French were counting in millions, and these massive armies soon able to subjugate the entire European continent, steamrolling everyone in their path. And much like during the Second World War, soon all that stood between Napoleon and total victory was the British Empire and the beleaguered Russian state. Fear and near hysteria accompanied each new wave of French victory, which was pretty understandable. For everyone knew, it wasn't the British army that held Napoleon back, but a mere 25-mile wide strip of water. As Napoleon himself once mused, let us be masters of the Channel for 6 hours, and we shall be masters of the world. Back in Britain, it was said that Napoleon had made a Faustian bargain, that he had sold his soul to the devil for control of the earth. It was said that he couldn't be bested in battle, and that his powers over men were absolute. And for 15 years, all the people of Britain heard was bad news and calls for further sacrifice. And to make matters worse, Napoleon had even destroyed the Russian army after defeating her and Austria's army at the brutal Battle of the Three Emperors near Austerlitz. Back home, the English press and peddlers of pamphlets began to fight the French Empire the best way they knew how. And so they began publishing some of the most blood-curdling and off-putting propaganda ever printed. And I'll tell you what, this animation style is the most British thing to have ever Britished, full stop. Well, between war hysteria and these rather chilling caricatures, all the common folks knew was that Frenchmen were devils, their women were hairy and unwashed, and their leadership was infiltrated by fools and the forces of Satan. And parents didn't know what to tell their kids about the war, so they simplified it in terms an ignorant child could understand. And so over time, the person of Napoleon was portrayed as a child-leering bagman, a malevolent force simply waiting to drag naughty children off to a satanic kingdom. So in the minds of common folks, Napoleon was now the literal boogeyman of Welsh myth, feared by young and old alike for his ability to take anything he wanted. Here's a rhyme thought to have been told to English children around this time. This particular one written down in 1908, but possibly derived from a much, much older rhyme about Oliver Cromwell of all people, dating from the 17th century. It goes like this. Baby, baby, naughty baby, hush you squealing thing I say. Peace this instant, peace or maybe, Bonaparte will pass this way. Baby, baby, he's a giant, black and tall as ruined steeple, sups and dines on lives relying every day on the naughty people. Baby, baby, if he hears you as he gallops past the house, limb from limb at once he'll tear you just as pussy tears a mouse. And he'll beat you, beat you, beat you, and he'll beat you all to pap. And he'll eat you, eat you, eat you, gobble you, snap, snap, snap. and thus the modern form of the Boogeyman was born. A short fiend, hobgoblin-like with wide, hungry eyes that takes naughty children away, never to be seen again. It's like subconsciously the adults were trying to make sense of their own situation, as they themselves were now living in fear. They all feared the revolution that old Boney brought, the knock at the door in the middle of the night, with men in black come to take the naughty away to be questioned and guillotined. All lives devoured by the monster that was the revolutionary state. Well, as with all tyrants, though, Napoleon too eventually fell, and with it the fear he inspired began to fade. Yet his name and image was already set in stone by English propagandists, morphing over time into our version of the Boogeyman, dweller of closets, lover of bugs, and stealer of naughty children. Well, as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping a like, sharing, or even subscribing. Every little bit helps. And until next time, this has been Storytime, and I've been your host, Andrew Jackson, wishing you safe travels and dry socks.